Thank you. Thank you. I am very honored to be here. Thank you so much for stopping out of your workday to come and listen to me. Again, my name is Leah Hollis, and I'm the president of Patricia Berkly, LLC. I'm a diversity training consulting group, and deliver a number of presentations and create training for staff to help your organization prevent discrimination lawsuits. Today's discussion, I'm going to just share a few things, and I'm entitling it The Perfect Storm. Favoritism, discrimination, retaliation, and the lawsuit. How do we avoid that? To tell you just a little bit more about me, I've been featured on the Jim Blassingame Show, the Small Business Advocate radio show, as a workplace discrimination expert. I've also been on the Jim Bohannon Show for the same purposes, especially when the Walmart case broke. I'm a regular contributor to Huffington Post and AOL Jobs, and often write for Pay Scale, which is an HR blog for HR professionals. So, let me talk about the discrimination suit for just a minute. If you're not careful, in many ways, the discrimination lawsuit can be like the perfect storm. It can come from 4 directions. It can grow very quickly, even though at the beginning of the day or the beginning of the quarter, all things were clear. It's sunny and shining, and then all of a sudden, the winds change and you have a lawsuit facing you. The kinds of things that can precipitate the perfect storm. If you have a change in policy, if you have legislative changes, if you have fiscal changes, that's all of a sudden your organization is feeling stressed financially, or even if you hire somebody new. Often a new actor or a new manager can also be a bit of a threat to your organization. So let me tell you a story. Imagine that you've hired your friend, we'll call him Dave, and nothing disparaging if there are any Daves in the audience, but you hire your friend Dave. You know he's eccentric. You've known him for years, however, he's a good friend of yours. However, within the first 3 months, you start hearing verbal complaints. Okay, he's a little bit abrasive, he might tell some inappropriate jokes, but you know, being a jerk is not illegal. He's well trained in his field, but he doesn't have that good home training. And you know, at his last company, he did really well. 15% increase in sales, everybody was very happy with him there. He had good references. He led a restructuring in his last organization. Maybe he just isn't settling in just yet. But the complaints keep happening. Verbal, little comments that you hear in the bathroom, people complaining in the parking lot, things that are coming up at meetings. And about 5 months into Dave's tenure, you notice 3 people have abruptly left. Now you have a search. And if you think about the cost of turnover, the Department of Labor has confirmed that every time somebody leaves your organization, you lose 30% to recruit, retrain, and retain that staff member. So if you have a staff member making $100,000 a year and they leave, you're going to spend $30,000 to replace them. And if you have 2 and 3 and 4 people leaving because you have a difficult personality on staff, you are spending their salary times that 30% to replace them. So you have all these people leaving, but Dave has this great reputation. But you didn't have the budget for the headhunter. You didn't have the time to restructure. You have a situation where now all these duties have to be redistributed across your work group, and they're a little ticked off. Under the stress of these resignations, here's the perfect storm brewing. Now your area has failed a compliance audit, and the people are still frustrated. Under the stress, you have 3 vacancies, you have redistributed work, and you've got Dave who's acting out, but he's your friend, remember? People are absent more, and it's not flu season. People are coming late, they're leaving early, they're taking extended lunches. All of you would know that people vote with their feet. If they're not comfortable at work, they're going to figure out how to spend less time engaged in an organization that is difficult. And also, too, when we often recruit our friends, we've all done it, you want to save face. You brought this person in, you said they were the greatest thing since sliced cheese. This person's going to turn it around for you, so you're going to keep working with Dave because you brought him in, you appointed him, you think that he's just having a rough period, despite the fact that you kind of see these other signals. The winds of change are turning. You've got all the warning signs. You have a bit of an employment tsunami coming, if you will. And you don't quite understand it because his last job. Then lightning strikes. Internally, you get a sexual harassment complaint from, let's say, Mary. Mary says that Dave is picking on her because of her gender and is mad because she has rebuffed his advances. Her complaint continues because he has unfair expectations of deadlines and other procedures, and he has inappropriate conversations in the office about how she dresses and about sex. Mary's relatively new to the organization. She's 42 years old, a newly minted MBA. She's smart, a little bit edgy though. She loves to wear short skirts and pumps. Does she like the attention? Is she complaining about Dave because she wants his job? Does Mary deserve the lewd comments? Does she really enjoy this kind of attention? And these are all the things that we might think but don't actually put out there, but in those private moments in the car commuting, you're weighing the situation. So now you've got an internal complaint. So what else could go wrong? As if it wasn't enough, your HR department is now saddled with 3 searches. It's saddled with the complaint and the compliance audit that was failed. And now they have to do this full-blown investigation because you must investigate when someone complains. And you tell Mary, we will investigate. Ooh, an investigation, is that a pain, right? So now you are running these 3 searches, this internal problem that's going on, and HR now starts the interview process. And HR is spread too thin. Nonetheless, HR is dedicated to doing a very thorough job. They interviewed 15 people. Some of those people were right there when Mary and Dave were interacting, whether it was in meetings or sidebar conversations, and they could tell firsthand what was going on. Other people decided they wanted to volunteer. This was their opportunity to complain about Dave. Let's face it, we all just admitted Dave was a jerk. And so other people jumped into the investigation because they want to air their grievances about Dave and his personality and all those other kinds of things. But they've now participated in a Title VII investigation. HR figures they should be very thorough, and they welcome this cattle call. So, moving forward, you do find out that Dave does tell a few off-color jokes. He might be a little bit sexist and racist sometimes, a little Al Bundy stuff going on. But there is no finding of sexual harassment. You do find out that Mary has been missing a lot of work. You find out that Mary has absenteeism. You find out that Mary comes late, has missed a couple deadlines, and she is not the stellar performer that you once thought she was. You're also thinking, what about those other 3 people who left? Some of them left. One lady left because her husband was transferred. Another person left because they got a promotion at another school or another job. And the third person we just don't quite know because HR wasn't conducting exit interviews. So at the end of the investigation, as we'd said, Dave, however, was found not to be this sexual harasser. And you find these things out about Mary. And you are thinking, let's move forward. We've got this out of the way. We've got to deal with the audit. We've got to replace these 3 people. We've got the investigation out of the way. Let's move forward with our restructuring. Danger sign. And let's start with Mary. Let's face it, she's a weak link. She's missed some days. She's missing deadlines. And so HR brings her in about 45 days after the whole investigation is over and lets Mary know that she is being let go. Mary is seething. How could this be? She's just got this MBA. Okay, she's been sick a little bit, but she's brought doctor's notes. HR blames her absenteeism for her termination. And now Dave continues. The complainer is gone. His inappropriate behavior continues. He continues with the crazy jokes. He transfers a couple people. Remember, there's a restructuring going on. And some of those people were part of the investigation. Your perfect storm is still churning. And you're thinking, let's face it, Dave was brought in to be a change agent. 3 months later, lightning strikes again, and Mary now has filed an external complaint with the Human Relations Commission of the state. She is now not just charging sexual harassment, she is now charging retaliation. She's claiming that she complained about her civil rights and then was let go sometime later. Meanwhile, remember those 15 people? they too are all protected by Title VII. So the person who was demoted, who was also part of the investigation, they have filed a retaliation complaint. Another person who was transferred to ours, they too are now filing for retaliation. And so you have a series of complaints here because you have an investigation, whether it was founded or not, sexual harassment or not, and now you have a series of retaliation complaints behind it. So the perfect storm goes something like this in this case. A new actor comes on, maybe by a friend or maybe just somebody appointed. And what happens is by appointing somebody, you've eliminated the chance for other people to fairly compete for that position. The plum job goes to somebody else. So your organization's already ticked off. The entitled person feels he or she can do no wrong. And they continue with whatever quirky, idiosyncratic behavior they have, and they may or may not correct it. Also, it is a misnomer. Title VII protects everybody. Regardless of race, class, gender, what have you. You are either born into it or you age into it when you hit the age of 40. So therefore, Mary, as a woman over 40, is protected by Title VII. HR needed to be very careful about who they investigated with. They probably could have done their investigation with 5 people. By opening up the case to 15 people, all 15 people invoke Title VII protection. So all those transfers and demotions and restructurings that are going on, all of those people, if they're ticked off, because remember, they can't stand Dave. They've just seen Mary get fired. And now they've lost hours, or now they've lost a project. And even though they don't have tangible loss financially, they still can charge retaliation. Retaliation is when someone complains or assists in a complaint and is protected by Title VII, then something bad happens to them, some adverse employment action. So in this case, 3 months later, Dave is fired. Your board can't take it anymore. His group had a 20% turnover and higher than the 5% natural attrition. And that's very common that something is going on. In this particular scenario, Dave has been the target of 6 discrimination cases. The organization has spent close to $1 million defending it. By the time you consider the depositions, the legal fees, the discovery process, times 6, plus lost productivity, bad PR, and all kinds of punitive damages and settlements. The legal cost of mediation. This was the perfect storm. Favoritism, discrimination, retaliation, and lawsuit. And before you pause and say, wait a minute, this is just some hyperbole she made up over lunch. I've seen this story a couple times. I've seen this happen to this magnitude. Something that starts out as a sunny day in your organization turns into one bad actor. In this case, the parable's true. One bad apple can spoil your bunch. And the minute you open up an investigation and bring all those people in and start messing with their employment status, and your staff figures out that they're protected, I've seen organizations where people are just throwing themselves at the investigator because they knew the minute that they participated in the investigation, they were protected. So you need to be careful, not just with the bad actor. When those oral complaints come forward, pay attention to them. There have been recent changes to Title VII retaliation and complaints. First of all, an oral complaint now is acceptable. It used to be you had to put it in writing. I believe it was March of this year, the Supreme Court ruled that somebody can come forward with an oral complaint, and it has just as much validity as a written complaint. It had also spread the definition of retaliation to include third party. So let's suppose I'm working at this fine restaurant and I complain about my civil rights, and my mother is fired. Third party retaliation. Let's suppose a gentleman complains that his office wasn't retrofitted for ADA purposes after a car accident, and his wife is transferred to later hours, therefore seriously affecting their child care. Under the Supreme Court this year, that is now ruled as retaliation. Many of the things that I talk about are in my book. This is Unequal Opportunity, Fired Without Cause, and Filing with the EEOC. And what was very interesting about researching this book is I spoke with a number of people who had been the target of workplace discrimination. Now, granted, I can't give their real names, and I can't tell about the organizations, and I've changed the states, but the scenarios are the same. People who have been passed over because of age. People who have been passed over because of pregnancy discrimination. People who were let go from their jobs 6 months from retirement after having a glowing career at that organization. And in most cases, these people prevailed. Juries do not like retaliation. Juries actually, quite frankly, retaliation is the easiest thing to avoid, but one of the largest complaint areas with the EEOC. So some of the things I recommend to organizations. You need to know the rules. They are always changing. You also need to be careful about favoritism. We've all been there. You're the hiring authority and you want to bring on your college buddy or somebody you've pledged with or something. And we do that as human beings. Familiarity feels good, especially on a very stressful job. But when you're favoring one person and you're unfairly locking somebody else, you can be setting yourself up. You need to be careful about retaliation. Again, the formula goes something like somebody complains about their civil rights. Whether it's valid or not, they complain. Then something bad happens. They place an adverse action, which is not just getting fired, it is transfer, demotion, being relocated, something that is adverse to their employment status. And now you've got a retaliation charge. As the example I talked about, the third party, that comes from Thompson versus American Steel. That was a case that was decided on in the spring of this year, where a woman had filed a gender discrimination complaint against American Stainless Steel. 3 weeks after her complaint hit the EEOC, her fiance was fired. The EEOC ruled that third-party retaliation is covered under Title VII. Also, as an organization, as I said before, make sure you have a fair search. Make sure that you document everything. And one thing employers don't always realize is that your doodles are discoverable. So if you're interviewing somebody, you write in the margins, overqualified, and that person comes back and says you didn't hire him, your doodles are discoverable. If you write out there, prego, it's in the margins, you're making a note, this is a pregnant client, pregnant candidate, that is discoverable. Be very careful with your notes, because they can come back and bite you. You need to take all complaints, oral and written, seriously. If somebody stands in your face and says, you know what, I've been treated unfairly because, you need to pay attention to that. I know it puts employers in a very tough situation of this he said, she said. No, he didn't, yes, she did, all that other kind of stuff. And if you hear an oral complaint, you might want to encourage the person. You do well to put it in writing so we can handle it. But whether they do or not, and the rationale behind that, is the Supreme Court ruled that there are some of us who love to write. I am one of those people. I love to talk, I love to write, and I can commit anything to writing. But everybody doesn't have the same opportunities to education. And some folks just barely get it together to open their mouth and say, I'm feeling this. And so as not to discriminate against folks who do not have the same facility to write out letters and to put it out there in a special format, they're saying they will accept the oral complaints as well. It puts employers in a very tough position. With your investigations, avoid the bandwagon. People will jump on it if they figure out that merely participating puts them in a position to be protected by Title VII. Also, if somebody complains, a clock is ticking. There is not an official temporal mark. I complained January 1, so this person is protected until June 1. It's roughly around 6 or 9 months, but you certainly want to talk with legal counsel if you have somebody complain about their civil rights, and then they're on the position to face a RIF or some layoff or change. But if it's within 6 months, you certainly can be on the hook for that. Other things that organizations can consider are employee practice insurance, an EPL. It is a new rider that many insurance companies are offering to help organizations stave off the cost of discrimination cases. It's called employee practice insurance. So if you have employees, about 50 of them, and you want $1 million rider to protect you, you'll have a deductible, much like car and house insurance. And what's interesting like that is that if you have proper training, if you bring people in to train your staff, your managers, and your supervisors on the rules, that will drive down your premium. It will protect your organization. And it's not just we're going to have training every 5 years. As I've mentioned already, there have been 2 very significant changes to these statutes this year alone. So I certainly encourage HR and organizations, review your handbooks, look into employee practice insurance, Keep yourselves updated with the most recent training and protect your organizations. Because what's also happening too is that you might hire Dave and he might have been just a wonderful person, but if you did not take the responsibility to make sure Dave was trained, he can say anything he wants to at home, but picking on people at work can get you sued. So you want to make sure that everybody is trained. Well, that pretty much concludes my remarks. I can talk about this topic for quite some time. Again, my name is Hollis, and I am the president of Patricia Berkly, LLC. I'm certainly happy to open up to any questions.